It is difficult to say when humanity first encountered the Tyranid menace. Some records suggest that humanity, and also the Eldari craft world Iyanden, discovered a bizarre Tyranid megastructure in the Tiamet System on the jungle world of Zeophoria as early as M35. This edifice is said to have spanned a continent and to have projected from its mass of chitin and encephalitic tissue a horrifically powerful psychic signal that drove the Eldari into fatal seizures. Rumour has it amongst the Ordo Xenos that this structure, and others like it, remain to this day seemingly raised by the strange beasts of High Fleet Tiamat for some as yet undisclosed purpose. It has caused much alarm among the groups of the Imperium and Xenos races that the Tyranids of High Fleet Tiamat appear to be adapted for defense, with Tyranids hitherto being known for relentless attacks and swiftly moving on to new targets. A sign that they have something to protect was a disturbing change in behaviour. For many years, the High Fleet has been content to lie relatively dormant, striking out only opportunistically at prey who have come too close. Things have now changed. More and more psychers complain of the build-up of a terrible psychic scream emanating from the Tiamet system. Also, the High Fleet's tendrils are pushing further and further out, crushing their foes beneath the heavy bulk of their warrior organisms, which possess unusually resilient chitinous armor plates and flesh capable of rapid regrowth. It's only a matter of time before Tiamet's true purpose is revealed, along with the nature of the bioconstruct it fiercely protects. You know, every time we get new Tyranid lore, every time there's a new Tyranid codex, I always have one question. What is going on with High Fleet Tiamat? It is by far the most interesting out of all of the High Fleets in my opinion, as terrifying as it is for Tyranid High Fleets to come into our galaxy and devour planets. It's actually far more scary when they come into our galaxy and don't devour planets. The concept of Tyranids just waiting around, building up their strength, waiting to strike out is objectively horrifying and will no doubt lead to some apocalypse level event at some point in the future. And what's crazy about Warhammer 40k lore is that the Tyranids have done this without really attracting too much attention from the Imperium. The Eldar seem to be far more concerned generally with what High Fleet Tiamat are doing. Now, as I say, I check every single codex for Tiamat lore, and it's interesting. I was going through all of the past Tyranids codexes for the last 20 years, and each book has a little bit more information on High Fleet Tiamat. So I thought we'd go through them today and come up with some ideas as to what the Tyranids are actually doing here and what Games Workshop is really building towards. Before I get on to that though, for today, very excitingly, this stream has actually been sponsored. So I did do a post about this earlier. So the kind folks at Asus, hang on, I'm going to send this probably. The kind folks at Asus sent this out to me. It is a graphics card, an AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX, and it is Ultramarines themed. Now, they impressed upon me many times in the emails that this does not work like Warhammer 40k technology, and that legally I cannot tell you the best way to maintain your computers is to pray and wipe machine oils onto them. But I told them that's not how Warhammer tech works. So who are you going to believe, really? Some people that make computers, or this guy on YouTube? Use your heads, people. But yes, so with this comes a copy of Space Marine 2. I've got a code which I can give you. If you would like to win this, all you've got to do is just be subscribed to the channel, comment down below. Members will automatically be entered anyway. And yeah, I'll do the draw on Monday when the game comes out, I think. So yeah, pretty cool. Thank you so much to Asus. There is a code down below for taking you to a landing page. And on that landing page, you've got their configurator for building computers. And they've also got a bunch of other giveaways. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. But thank you so much to those guys for sponsoring the videos. Moving on then to the meat and potatoes, because that's all
you know, Asus, the Imperium, they're so used to using, you know, metal and non-biological technology, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But the Tyranids, they don't mess around with this. Their structures are biological. So we don't actually know at all what this massive continent-spanning structure is. And it's kind of impressive, I think, that Games Workshop have kept this hidden all this time. Now, interestingly, this is a pretty big plot point in some small circles. So the Death Watch, for example, where you'll find Lieutenant Titus in the start of the Space Marine 2 game, they are concerned with Hive Fleet Tiamet. It's a huge problem. But they actually have a massive issue. There is a significant, unique problem with destroying Hive Fleet Tiamet.
Call of the Void. Upon the world of Heinrich's March, worshippers of the Dark Gods work their tortured slaves to death as they attempt to erect a monolithic ziggurat in honor of their foul patrons. A new and hidden cult propagates amidst the persecuted masses, the Choir of the Void. Its leader, the blind prophet, known as the Conduit, preaches that a savior race from beyond the stars awaits them in a far-off place, a paradise planet where they will find salvation. In a great uprising, millions of slaves overwhelm their masters and commandeer several cargo hulks. This armada of the faithful makes for the nearby Tiamet System, guided by the visions of the Conduit. Ominous reports. More and more reports of missing ships and lost fleets drift into Watch Fortress Holtmote. The common denominator in each of these cases is that the vessels were last reported in the vicinity of the Tiamet System, far from safe haven. Watch Commander Vilnius orders an immediate survey of the area. Dread discovery. Kill Team Yunheim departs from Holtmote to investigate the reports of missing trade fleets near the Tiamet System. The Death Watch drift in system unnoticed and land upon Zeophoria. There, they discover the Xenos superstructure that covers the planet's largest continent. When this vast device pulses, sending a tsunami of psychic energy rolling across the planet, the Kill Team's librarian suffers a catastrophic cranial rupture. His screams alert nearby Tyranids, and soon the remaining Battle Brothers are surrounded by swarming Xenos. Before he and his remaining Battle Brothers are torn apart, Watch Sergeant Yunheim manages to send one final transmission to the team's orbiting Corvus Blackstar, warning of the nightmare his men have uncovered. The Butcher of Octarius. Holtmote receives an unexpected guest, the exiled Inquisitor Cryptman. Watch Commander Vilnius agrees to an audience with the Outcast, who has his own grim theories regarding the mysterious Hive Fleet Tiamet. Together, the two begin to formulate a plan that will see whatever the Tyranids are creating utterly obliterated.
So Hive Fleet Tiamet is essentially so strong, or at least this megastructure is so powerful, that Chaos cults stop worshipping the Dark Gods and start worshipping the Star Gods, or the Tyranids. That's what the Star Gods are to them. That shows you that this power can overcome one of the greatest powers in the galaxy, which is of course chaos corruption. And to even try and halt the growth of this megastructure is fraught with difficulty, because any psychers will be driven to madness and will basically have a brain hemorrhage just by going into the vicinity of the system. And we see this again because Craftworld Iyanden also grew concerned with the rising megastructure, and they decided to try and destroy it themselves. They sent some Eldari Rangers, but they, again, started having seizures and spasms because the Eldari are all very psychically potent. So you can't take Psychers to handle this problem. It's a huge issue. The other thing about Hive Fleet Tiamet that's really interesting is that they might actually be the first Hive Fleet that entered our galaxy, or at least one of the first. It's generally believed that the first Tyrannic War was the first proper incursion of Tyranids into our galaxy. That's where we get the name Tyranids, because they attacked a planet called Tyran. However, in many other books, we have got these instances of Tyranids appearing earlier. So in the Caiaphas Cain series, they run into some Tyranids that appear to have been frozen for 8,000 years. In the older lore, you have references to Hive Fleet Ouroboros and the suggestion that maybe even the Emperor fought against Hive Fleet Ouroboros in the Great Crusade. And Hive Fleet Tiamet, again, falls into this kind of pocket of lore that the Imperium has overlooked. The Imperium didn't properly register that Hive Fleet Tiamet were Tyranids for a long time. They thought they were just their own individual race. Therefore, they didn't connect them to the wider Tyranid problem for a while. And in actual fact, the Hive Fleet Tiamet started to press out into the galaxy long before Hive Fleet Behemoth even got to the galaxy, because the Ymgarl Genestealers, which are a specific type of Genestealer, they date back to the first edition of the game. They're referred to as the Ymgarl Genestealers because they come from the moon of Ymgarl. But now it just looks like they were Genestealers created by Hive Fleet Tiamet and sent out across the galaxy, including to this specific moon. Now, what's unique about these Genestealers is that it's said that the Tyranid Hivemind doesn't really like them. So typically, after the Tyranids have consumed a planet, what they will do is reabsorb the biomass that they've put into conquering the world. However, they don't like to reabsorb this biomass. And you might be wondering, how did Hive Fleet Tiamet even send Genestealers out across the galaxy, given that they're dormant and have been basically static on one world? One system, I should say. And the reason they could do that is because the only time people actually run into confrontation with Hive Fleet Tiamet is when they come too close. When ships come to investigate the planet, the Tyranids will normally rebuff them, get them to flee, but as they flee, they'll incept Genestealers within the vessel, so that as the vessel returns home, unknown to the crew inside, they're actually carrying a Genestealer within their bulk. And that's how they started to spread these Genestealer cults throughout the galaxy. And we don't know to this day what percentage of Genestealer cults actually come from Hive Fleet Tiamet. And I suspect, and the hint is that it's actually far more than we believe. Because you have to remember, Hive Fleet Tiamet has been in the galaxy for 5,000 years longer than any other Tyranid Hivemind, allegedly. And so their impact has been huge. In the older editions of the lore, in the 4th edition, I believe it is, we do get some insight into how the Hive Fleet was first discovered and what happened when the first Explorator fleet discovered these unique Xenos. Tiamet was the name given to a large double binary system on the eastern fringe in M35 by an Explorator fleet hailing from the Triplex Fool. Tiamet was remarkable in that it contained no less than 7 large life-sustaining worlds and a host of lesser planetoids. Explorators discovered to their cost that every biosphere in the system was a death world of the most voracious kind. Whether the prevailing climate was jungle, ice or desert, or even airless rocks, a host of dangerous life forms swarmed, multiplied and warred on each other with an uncanny intelligence which united them against man's intrusion with deadly results. Xenologists eventually discovered that the life all over the system shared common ancestry and had developed various ways to get from world to world to seed new territory. Realizing their own craft would be contaminated from entering the system by now, the Explorators quarantined themselves in Tiamet. They were to survive and report for another 162 hours before succumbing to the lethal denizens of that fecund realm. Tiamet was systematically fusion bombed on several occasions, but life was never extinguished there. It now lies within the area swept over by Hive Fleet Kraken, and as such, its fate is unknown. Most theories about Tiamet place it as an implant probe, believing that some kind of Tyranid seed, possibly molecular coded DNA, is responsible. By some means, perhaps cosmic debris or solar winds, the Tyranid seed was introduced to the system and spread of its own accord to form its own rudimentary hivemind and predatory ecosystem. It is now believed that the Genestealers were introduced to the moons of Ymgarl from Tiamet, carried inside the hulls of the vessels that had been sent to destroy them. In that passage, we see that there's a suggestion that this structure somehow has developed its own hive mind, and that's a pretty radical concept in that it kind of defies the way we view Tyranids. But interestingly, in more recent Warhammer 40k lore, the idea that the hive mind is split up or there are different aspects of it has been explored a little bit, because Chief Librarian Tigurius, for example, of the Ultramarines, whereas before it was said he kind of interfaced with the hive mind psychically, nowadays they typically think of it as he only interfaced with a small part of the hive mind. And so potentially this thing is somehow designed to kind of grow the hive mind, or it's at least a second part of it. But that piece of lore was not repeated in any of the other codexes that I read. You also, again, have this kind of unique wording around how the Tyranids around this megastructure started warring with each other and fighting one another. And this goes back to some of the older Warhammer 40k lore that talks about how there are theories around ancient Tyranids landing across planets throughout the Imperium. And over the millennia, they kind of devolved into other kind of races. And that's where you get things like the Catachan Devils from and the Fenris Leviathans, because you have these beings that are descended from Tyranids, but are no longer kind of pure Tyranid, as it were. And so that seems to have been what that suggestion is, which would make sense that maybe the Tyranids spread out across this system, and over the 5,000 years that they dwelt there, there were other kind of evolutions, maybe that devolved away from kind of the typical Tyranid structures, which I think would make sense. And perhaps over time that causes some sort of infighting with the other Tyranids on the planet, which is, again, a pretty kind of wild thing. And as I mentioned earlier, in that passage, again, you start to see these suggestions that even in the universe within Warhammer 40k, the Imperium really has no idea what is going on with Hive Fleet Tiamet. And they themselves are formulating their own kind of theories as to how to kind of battle it and what it's even doing. Is it a weapon or is it a beacon of some kind? And the suggestion in the 4th edition codex is that it's kind of like this beacon drawing other Hive fleets to it. And that's why Hive Fleet Kraken ended up coming to the Tiamet system and kind of swarming over. And then, of course, Hive Fleet Kraken moved on and ended up commencing the Second Tyranic War. Would it be cool to see separate hive minds with something native to our galaxy, causing them to split off? Well, I think what's interesting about the separate hive mind kind of suggestion there is that it would probably be easier for the Imperium to fight against the Tyranids if you have different hive minds, because the unity within the Tyranid force is one of the things that makes it so strong. And if you read any of the books where even the Space Marines fight against the Tyranids, they're constantly kind of outplayed strategically because they just can't match the strategic brilliance of the hive mind, which is basically a god in Warhammer 40k. It's that kind of level of power. So it's a tough one. Wouldn't any clash between separate hive minds just cause either side to evolve to become an even stronger threat against the Imperium? Maybe that's how it will, form its own kind of Octarius war, and it will do that strategically to make itself stronger. It wouldn't be a bad plan if you're a Tyranid. When we look at the theories around Hive Fleet Tiamet, one thing that's quite funny, I guess, is that Inquisitor Cryptman is especially concerned with what's going on Zeophoria. And the reason that's quite funny is because Inquisitor Cryptman is the same Inquisitor who basically caused the Octarius War between the Tyranids and the Orcs. And this was quite famously one of the biggest blunders within 40k's history. So his plan was to have them face each other and hopefully wipe each other out. But what ended up happening was that the Tyranids and the Orcs kind of battled each other for many years and actually made themselves stronger as the Tyranids evolved and the Orcs built up their strength through their innate Orky warness. And so he ended up kind of causing a disaster because he thought they would wipe each other out, but he actually made each force stronger in a way. And the Tyranid force that came out of the Octarius War was far more dangerous than the one that went into it. So it's kind of slightly concerning that Inquisitor Cryptman is concerned with what's going on Zeophoria, because there's every chance he makes the situation much, much worse. Outside of just the tower itself, the Tyranids have evolved specifically for defense, and we see this through them having especially strong armor, as hard as diamonds in some areas, and the Tyranid warriors themselves are so strong they can easily just crush their foes and heavy armor. But really, it's not the Tyranids that is keeping Inquisitors up at night. It's the fact that they have no idea what this megastructure does. So the structure is said to span a continent, and there's a bunch of theories as to what it could be. So as we spoke about, it could be some sort of beacon. This would tie in quite well with the older Warhammer 40k lore around what brought the Tyranids to our galaxy. So for most of Warhammer 40k's history, it was kind of presumed that the Astronomicon, the beacon that the Emperor directs that allows human crafts to traverse the warp, that beacon was so bright the Tyranids could see it from across the galaxy, and that brought them to the Milky Way. However, in the Horus Heresy, we get a story based around the planet of Sotha, where there's a device known as the Pharos Beacon that is used by the Loyalists to help them traverse the warp. However, when the Night Lords try to take it over, the device gets overloaded, and basically it's thought to be destroyed, and it sends out a system, and it sends out a signal that traverses through the blackness of space and eventually is detected by the Hivemind, and the Tyranids change course and head towards our galaxy, and it takes them 10,000 years to get here. So it could be something like that, perhaps to attract other hive fleets and tendrils that may be on their own and disconnected from the central kind of Tyranid force that's heading towards our galaxy. The other option, there are a bunch of other options though. So, for example, one thing that we see in Warhammer 40k is the Tyranids have kind of a unique way of traveling faster than light. So the Tyranid fleet, the Tyranid hive fleets have these specific ships in them called narvals, and they're what allow the Tyranids to travel so fast. And the way they work is they basically center on a planet or a mass object, an object with mass, far away, and they have this technology that allows them to basically use the gravity of that mass to pull them towards them. We don't really understand how this works, but one of the downsides of this method of travel is that it forces you to slow down as you approach it. And the reason that's a big problem in the 40k for the Tyranids is because the Tyranids now can't all arrive at the same time. They're arriving kind of high fleet by high fleet. That's why we have these four kind of separate tyrannic wars. Whereas, of course, what the Tyranids would want to happen is for the Tyranids to all kind of arrive at once. And there's a theory around that the tower on Zeophoria, what it might allow the Tyranids to do is to travel faster in this kind of last kind of sprint towards the Milky Way galaxy to allow the other hive fleets to get here sooner. Because the Imperium and the denizens of the Milky Way galaxy stand a much better chance of fighting off the Tyranids if the Tyranids kind of drip into the galaxy Hive fleet by Hive fleet, they'll still likely lose as things currently stand. But they stand a much better chance than if the Tyranids could hit the galaxy all at once. And so perhaps that's what the tower can do. It will act as some sort of stabilizing device that will allow the rest of the Tyranids to reach the galaxy. It's important to remember that it's generally believed that the Tyranids we've seen so far are a small fraction of the total number of Tyranids. It's even hinted that there might be more Hive fleets than there are systems within the galaxy. So humanity, the Eldar, basically stand no chance. The Tyranids are making a giant space gargantuan Nid capable of swallowing planets whole. I mean, that's weirdly a perfectly valid theory, I think, and something people do suggest is that it could be one massive Tyranid body that potentially could act as maybe a vessel for the Hivemind, or something that would allow the Hivemind to kind of directly to interfere more actively within the galaxy, maybe something that will allow them to travel more easily across the galaxy. How many galaxies has the Great Devourer picked clean? It's a great question. We don't know, and it's thought that it might be many, and so that's kind of goes into this idea that the humanity stands no chance, and the Tyranids are one of the greatest threats in Warhammer 40k to us. Do you believe the theory that the Tyranids wiped out life in the surrounding local supergroup of galaxies in 40k? Perhaps. I think it's more likely that they made a beeline for our galaxy once they discovered us, but maybe they have done. It wouldn't surprise me. I feel like the concept of Tyranids being inevitable was fine when the lore wasn't moving forward, but now that things are happening, I don't see how it resolves without a Deus Ex Machina. I totally get that, mate. Joshi. Joshi. It's a big problem, like with the 40k setting generally. So, and I think that they're handling it badly as well currently in the writing. So in the fourth Tyrannic War, for example, I think what they should have done was, this should have been the war where the Imperium does really well versus the Tyranids. It's still a huge problem. Millions of people die. But I think that the emphasis should have been that actually the Imperium stands a chance versus the Tyranids. That's perfectly fine to put into the Warhammer 40k setting, in my opinion, because ultimately everyone's going to convince the Imperium will inevitably lose. So it certainly wouldn't lessen the threat of the Tyranids. But the problem is that against the Hive fleets that the Imperium is currently facing, I don't know if you've read the book Leviathan, but the Ultramarines have fought 3 Tyrannic Wars before the 4th. They get outclassed in terms of the warriors that they're fighting against. They don't have a match for them, and their strategies and tactics are completely outclassed by the Tyranids again and again. So their only option is to kind of develop, basically, there are 2 kind of super weapons the Imperium is currently working on, which is probably a video I'll do at some point. But yeah, they basically have, it kind of makes the conflict less interesting, because it's exactly as you say, the story is currently going in the state of the Imperium loses over and over. They keep going. The Tyranids have evolved. The Tyranids are so much better. The Imperium thought they were good, but the Tyranids are so much better. But then somehow the Tyranids lose. And you're just like, that's not really compelling. That doesn't really, that doesn't make it interesting. I think it would have been far more interesting to have the Tyranids actually kind of get, their ass kicked a bit. Because, yeah, it would have shown, as you say, kind of made more sense in the longer story, because at a certain point we're all going to get to the stage of like, hang on, how can the Imperium possibly beat the 5th Tyrannic War? Because there's just the Tyranids are just so much better than them at everything, and there's more of them. If the Nids' victory is as inevitable as it seems, how could the various factions realistically survive? Hiding Comora. Yes, and that's a really interesting theory, and again, could actually be very relevant here. So when it comes to the structure on Zeophoria, another theory that people have is that maybe this is a device that will allow the Tyranids to pierce the webway, because they want to consume all biomass, presumably that includes the Drukhari that dwell within Commorragh. They pretty much have no interest in the warp because they're not evolved to consume demons. But they might be trying to, delve into the webway so they can consume everything inside. And maybe that's what the structure is going to do. But otherwise, typically, yeah, that will, unless the Tyranids can kind of go through a webway gate or some sort of breach, then typically jumping into the webway will allow you to survive, and is one of the reasons historically the Eldar felt very confident when fighting against the Tyranids, and why the Iyanden had such a disaster, because they thought that what they could do is just kind of attack the Tyranids from multiple sides, and then hop back into the webway, jump back out again. But actually, the Tyranids proved to be far smarter than anybody suspected. What is Chaos's stance on the Tyranids? So again, it's quite funny you say that. There's a very famous scene that takes place in the book Devastation of Baal. So when the I think it's on Baal Secundus. So within the Baal system, where the Blood Angels are from, that is attacked by Hive Leviathan in the Third Tyrannic War, and in that battle, there's this moment where the Great Rift opens, and the servants and demons of Khorne pour out of the Great Rift and attack the Tyranids in the Baal system, and actually wipe this moon clean. And the reason they do that, and they just pile up all the skulls and then disappear later on. And the reason they do that is because they hate the Tyranids, and Karbanda, the greater demon who was sworn to kind of wipe out the Blood Angels, he believes that, if anyone's going to kill the Blood Angels, it's going to be him. So there's a very weird, probably enough to call it allying, but it's there's a very weird essential team up that happens in that book, which is quite a funny scene. But yeah, so they're not big fans, and again, it's what's weird about the Tyranids, Necrons, and Chaos is that there's a surprising lack of overlap between them. So what I mean by that is that the Tyranids can't currently consume Necrodermis. They probably could evolve to consume it, so it probably gets overblown, but they also can't really consume demon flesh. There is Hive Fleet Kronos that is evolved to tackling demons, and they have very strong kind of anti-psycho abilities that weaken the effects of the warp. But generally speaking, they're not very good at battling one another because they kind of operate in different levels, and so it's not a matter of just pure might. So yeah, it's quite interesting. But it'll be cool to see that. That would be a really interesting development for the Tyranids. Would be to see the Tyranids, and maybe the smartest thing to do with the Tyranid threat for now would be to have them battle against the Necrons, because the Necrons and the Tyranids could essentially cause some sort of stalemate. And the Necrons, again, are this faction that has a level of power that just the Imperium can't even hope to match. So having them kind of locked in a civil war might be a good way to kind of shelve the Tyranid problem for a while. Are you suggesting the idea of a biological golden throne type thing that found a webway gate and now evolves around it? It could be a golden throne type device again, both in terms of maybe it directs some sort of Astronomicon, and also maybe it acts as something that will allow them to kind of breach the webway. So yeah, that's again a popular kind of analogy that people like to use, and would be pretty interesting because you'd have, I spoke about the Dark Throne in another video, so you'd kind of have 3 golden thrones in a way. You'd have this golden throne on Terra, you'd have the Dark Throne in Commorragh, and you'd have this kind of biological Tyranid golden throne on Zeophoria. So there would be some kind of fun symbolism there for the writers to mess around with. The Tyranids would have to have a natural predator to keep their numbers in check, so they do not consume more planets than they could possibly sustain them. There has to be some sort of ecology in space. Potentially. I mean, and that's a common thing that comes up that people suggest is maybe the Tyranids aren't the dominant race in the galaxy, and maybe they're running from something. And again, could be something that comes up in terms of the structure on Zeophoria, or the towers. Maybe they're a weapon that is designed not to kind of fire at the Imperium, but is maybe it's a fortress, or maybe it's a weapon that is designed to fight against some other Xenos entity that is chasing the Tyranids into our galaxy, which is a terrifying thought, the idea that the Tyranids are not a dominant race in this respect. But it also could just be a weapon that fights against our against the forces of the Imperium and other Xenos races. And that there's definitely a couple of things it could do there. So firstly, as we saw, to go near to the towers can drive a psycho to madness or cause seizures or brain hemorrhages. And so if they can kind of amplify that shadow in the warp ability that they have, they could massively reduce the psychic potency of the Imperium, stop them traveling faster than light. They could greatly diminish the impact of the Emperor within the galaxy. They could greatly reduce the strength of psykers fighting for the Imperium or other Xenos races. So that would be a very strong ability. And the other thing that it could potentially be doing there, the Tyranids need these kind of synapse creatures to keep them from kind of devolving into ravaging beasts and just kind of attacking things at a whim. And when you kill the leader beasts within the Tyranid swarm, it makes dealing with the smaller ones much easier, because they basically they just kind of digress into their kind of natural biological programming, and they lose all kind of semblance of strategy or tactics. So it's often a tactic employed within the books. But potentially what this device could do is it could send out a signal, within a large part of the galaxy at the very least, that would allow the Tyranids to kind of stay cohesive even if their leader beasts are destroyed. And additionally, it would allow greater cooperation between the various Hive fleets. Because as we see with kind of Hive Fleet Tiamet developing kind of, Diamond Heart Chitin, and Hive Fleet Kronos developing abilities to destroy demons, the different Hive fleets have evolved to tackle different problems. But if they can kind of share their gifts across different Hive fleets, that would massively increase the potential of individual Hive fleets, as they can more easily adapt to a format or type of warfare that is more effective versus their foes. So yeah, it's another option for what this could be. I think one kind of way that the Fourth Tyrannic War might help the Imperium is, I think it might lead to the reunion of the Lion and Guilliman, because we do know now from the Dark Angels Codex that the Lion himself is fighting against Tyranids now, and potentially that's going to be Hive Fleet Leviathan, because Hive Fleet Leviathan is in both sections of the galaxy, and maybe we'll see the Lion return to Terra to defend the Throne World, because the current Hive fleets are a big issue, given that they are on a path to Terra, which would lead to the end of everything, basically. If we lose the Emperor, it is very much game over. So if we have a look at this map here, what's interesting about Hive Fleet Tiamet is that it has actually moved slightly from one of the older codexes. So this might just be from the lore evolving, but it also might give us another suggestion as to what Hive Fleet Tiamet is actually building. So as you can see, currently they're towards the east of the galaxy, and that's not bad for the Imperium in that it keeps them far away from Terra on the other side of the Great Rift. However, we do see in some of the older lore a suggestion that you do get Hive Fleet Tiamet within Segmentum Obscurus, I believe. And perhaps that's some sort of suggestion that maybe this device is allowing the Tyranids to kind of teleport across the galaxy. And given what we know about the Ymgarl Genestealers and how they were kind of sent out to kind of seed cults across the Milky Way, perhaps this fits their MO very well. And just as we saw in the discussions about kind of the webway and that perhaps it's something to allow the Tyranids to kind of travel faster, perhaps this is some sort of device that will allow them to just travel throughout the Milky Way very quickly. And it's a huge issue. But as you can see in this map, the Imperium considers the area around Hive Fleet Tiamet kind of off limits, because historically they don't really leave Hive Fleet Tiamet don't really leave the system very much, but if you go near to the system, you will almost certainly be devoured. So it's best to keep your distance, absolutely. I finished the Devastation of Baal, and I was confused because the Eye of Terror opened mid-battle, but Guilliman also came. So when did he come back? Before or after Cadia fell? Welcome, my friend. Yeah, you are right. It's a very kind of weird issue. Yeah, we can't really explain it. The only it's due to the warp kind of messing with time, basically, is what I think most people presume. But certainly they kind of messed around with the timelines there. And in the current, as you I think suggesting, in the current kind of 40k narrative, it's typically said that the Great Rift didn't really open until after Guilliman awakened, and he took part in the Indomitus Crusade for I think like 80 years. I have to double check that. But yeah, so in theory there should have been a big time difference. But this big rift opening. Maybe it was just another rift, but again, in theory, in the book it talks about like how some of the Blood Angels are at Cadia during this conflict, and even the Sanguinor is at Cadia. That's why he doesn't turn up to kind of later in the fight. So yeah, there's a bit of some canon issues there, but given that the Great Rift was opening, we generally give it a pass, because the idea that the time dilation messed everything up is not so bad. Could be worse. It's the time you can kind of use that card, I think. Cool. Men of Iron would be the perfect weapon against them, but none of them anymore. Well, potentially. There's always the option to... Yeah, I mean, I think that the biological side of things is also something that comes up quite a lot. So the Farsight Enclaves, the Farsight Enclaves defeat the Tyranids Hive Fleet Kraken with a biological weapon. No, is it Kraken? I can't remember. Yeah, the ones that attack the Farsight Enclaves. And then it might be Gorgon, I think it is. I can't remember. Anyway, and in the book Leviathan, the spoiler, but for the ending of that book is the discovery that Voltis, who's this apothecary biologist, an apothecary kind of studies Xenos, he believes he can kind of create this weapon that will sort of allow him to kind of disrupt synapses and the way the Tyranids are controlled. So he runs a test. The test doesn't really work, but the book kind of ends with him believing he's got the solution. So that might play into Space Marine 2, honestly. I think that if they do an expansion pack, or they do a book or something connected to how the Fourth Tyrannic War ends, I think you will most likely see that come up. But it's also pretty cool that they have this kind of super weapon in Death Welder, because again, it's another option for them. And I hope we see the Imperium kind of show that they stand some sort of chance versus the Tyranids, because it's just far more interesting. Someone really needs to do an audit to the secret vaults of Mars. We need some of their stuff. True. But then I don't know if you read the Pariah Nexus campaign book, but in that they end up using all this technology from the Dark Age. The Belisarius Core kind of allows all these Mechanicus ships to use this ancient technology, and it goes about as well as you'd expect, and half the ships just blow themselves up. So it's definitely not something you want to use too lightly, but it's pretty interesting. Cool. I think I will call this stream there. As I said, I don't want to get back into streaming more regularly, so thank you so much for stopping by. And like I said, I've been working on some, I think, pretty big videos, which I'm really excited to share with you guys, and they're covering big stories. The next one coming out hopefully soon. I promise you, I'm to get out. It's a very long video, and it covers one of the biggest characters in Warhammer 40k that you almost never heard of mentioned before, but you more likely get the reference. So that'll make sense when you watch the video. But yeah, I will do that. But let me kind of wrap up here. So yeah, there are many theories as to what Hive Fleet Tiamet is actually working on, and I'll be really interested to see in the comments, what do you think Hive Fleet Tiamet is actually building? What do you think the mega structure, these towers, could actually be doing? Do you think it's a defensive weapon, an offensive weapon, something to help them with logistics? I'll be really interested to kind of see your theories. And for me, this is by far the most interesting out of all of the Hive Fleets, and is undoubtedly going to be connected to whatever the Tyranids' big play is whenever they all kind of reach the galaxy. It is an end game level threat within Warhammer 40k. The books are, all of the codexes have the same kind of lines in them around how, when the Imperium discovers what Hive Fleet Tiamet is actually doing, it's going to be catastrophic. So Games Workshop have been very consistent on this for a really long time. But yeah, let me know in the comments. And just to remind you, please do comment below if you want to be in with a chance to win a copy of Space Marine 2 and the graphics card. Then yeah, make sure you put down below just some sort of comment. If you're a member, you'll be entered automatically. I'll be doing the draw on Monday, so yeah, let me know. But thank you so much for checking out this video or the stream. I'm going to try and stream every Wednesday, so make sure you got that bell notification turned on. I'll also be playing some Space Marine 2 probably this week, because everyone is ready. Everyone in the world. Well, actually, everyone should play it. That would end a lot, I think, of like, that would end most wars, right? If we could just play video games more often. Has anyone ever suggested that? Anyway, but thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. And that's a wrap for today's stream. If you enjoy these kinds of Warhammer 40k lore breakdowns and discussions, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss me going live. For those of you who want extra content and to support the channel, consider clicking the join button. Becoming a member will give you access to more videos and streams, and our Discord community, where you can chat with other lore enthusiasts and myself. Thanks again for watching, look out for any Chaos or Genestealer cults in your area, and I'll see you next time.